Welcome back to Process Cast with Mark Anderson and Samantha Blake. Your go-to podcast for insights into business process management and the technologies transforming the way we work.
Ever get the feeling that finding truly great leaders is kind of like winning the lottery? We spend billions on leadership development, years of research, all this effort, and then you see the numbers. And it's kind of alarming, really.
Yeah, the disconnect is pretty striking, isn't it? So much investment.
Exactly. Like less than 2/3 of leaders are seen as commercially savvy. Barely half, just over half, can drive real change. And only 44% are effectively building the next generation of talent. It's like, what are we missing here?
It really begs the question, what actually works? What are the real ingredients of effective leadership, especially in today's, crazy, fast-changing world?
And that's exactly what we're diving into today. What makes for effective leadership in these modern organizations?
Mm-hmm.
And we're going beyond the usual, the same old advice. We've got some serious data to unpack.
Absolutely. We'll be looking at a really comprehensive report by Bersin by Deloitte.
Oh yeah, they're a leader in this space.
They are a very well-respected research firm specializing in HR and talent management. And this report, it's not just someone's opinion. It's based on a massive survey, over 2,000 HR and business leaders, 95 countries.
Wow, a global perspective.
Exactly. So we're really getting a good picture of what's actually happening out there in the real world.
So our mission today is not just to list off different leadership styles, autocratic, democratic, all that. We've all heard those before.
Yeah, we want to go deeper, past those surface level descriptions.
Right. If I can kind of connect this to the big picture for our listener, I think what we're really trying to get at is what is the organizational context, that environment that actually allows effective leaders to not just, appear, but to actually thrive and grow.
Precisely. What are the conditions that really cultivate leadership in this complex, ever-changing landscape we find ourselves in? And ultimately, how can we use this knowledge? So, you listening right now can actually understand and influence leadership effectiveness in your own world, whether you're leading a team, a whole department, or just trying to figure out the dynamics of your own organization.
It's all about practical application.
Oh.
All right, so let's jump into the research, shall we? And one of the first things that jumps out, maybe even a little surprising, is that leadership development programs, the kind you send people to, they aren't always the silver bullet we might think they are.
Yeah, you'd think just sending everyone to leadership training would solve everything.
Right, but it's more complicated.
It is. The research really emphasizes that while those programs have their place, the key factor, the thing that makes the biggest difference, is the broader organizational context.
And this organizational context, as the report calls it, it's not just some vague concept. It's the entire ecosystem of the company, the culture, the practices, the very structure itself.
Absolutely. It's like the soil where leadership either takes root and flourishes or withers and dies.
I love that analogy. So how does the report break down this organizational context?
Well, they identify 3 overarching factors that are really crucial. First, and this one's pretty intuitive, is organizational culture. The shared mindset, values, those unspoken rules of behavior that everyone kind of picks up on.
Yeah, like is it a culture that encourages learning, taking risks, embracing growth, or is it more, about keeping your head down and not rocking the boat?
Exactly. A culture of fear, for example, probably won't produce a lot of innovative leaders.
Makes sense. What's the second factor?
The second is designed leadership. And this refers to the specific things, the programs and initiatives that an organization actually puts in place to develop leadership skills.
So not just hoping leaders will magically appear, but actually, being intentional about cultivating them.
Right. Things like mentoring programs, giving people challenging assignments, even the performance management system. How it's designed can either support or hinder leadership development.
So it's not enough to have a great culture. You need to back it up with action. And the third piece of the puzzle.
That's organizational design. And this is about the very architecture of the company, how teams are structured, how information flows, where decisions are made, how easy or difficult it is for different parts of the business to collaborate.
So it's not just about individuals or the overall vibe. It's literally how the company is set up, the nuts and bolts.
Exactly. Those 3 things, organizational culture, design leadership, and organizational design, they all come together to create the overall environment where leadership can either flourish or struggle.
Got it. So we have this big picture context. Now let's zoom in a bit. What are some of the specific things that organizations can actually do to cultivate effective leadership?
Well, the report highlights 5 critical drivers that have a really big impact on leadership maturity. And what's fascinating is that they all share a common thread.
Oh, intrigue me. What's the common thread?
They all focus on learning and development through connection, collaboration, and real-world experience. It's not just about individuals studying on their own. It's about creating opportunities for people to learn from each other, apply their knowledge in different situations, and grow together.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's how we learn best in general, right? Through interaction and application.
All right.
So what are these 5 critical drivers?
All right. The first one is communicating the leadership model. And it sounds simple, but it means making sure everyone in the organization understands what good leadership looks like in their specific context. It's not about some generic leadership principles. It's about defining what effective leadership means for your company, your industry, your goals, and then really making sure that understanding is shared and reinforced throughout the organization.
Right. So it's not just a document gathering dust on a server somewhere.
Exactly. It's about a shared understanding that actually guides people's actions. I mean, think about it. If your employees don't know what good looks like in your specific context, how can they even aim for it?
That's a really good point. Okay, what's the second driver?
The second one is HR and business collaboration. And the research found a really strong link between how well HR and business leaders work together on leadership development and the overall maturity of leadership in the organization.
Right.
When those two groups are in sync, when they partner to identify needs, design programs, implement strategies, it just works better.
Makes sense. Leadership development can't be seen as just an HR thing off in a silo somewhere.
Right. It has to be integrated into the core business strategy, driven by the actual needs of the business.
Absolutely.
Right.
Okay, what's the third driver that sets those high maturity organizations apart?
This one is risk-taking. Organizations that foster a culture where people feel comfortable proposing new ideas, challenging the status quo, and importantly, learning from both successes and failures, they tend to cultivate more mature leadership. It's about creating that environment of experimentation and continuous improvement.
Yeah, it's about psychological safety. Not being afraid to step outside your comfort zone and try new things, even if they don't always work out.
Exactly. Because sometimes the best learning comes from those so-called failures.
Yeah.
Okay, the fourth driver is knowledge sharing. When you have a culture where people are encouraged and empowered to share their expertise, their insights, their stories, both good and bad, it just lifts everyone up.
Yeah.
It creates this collective learning environment where best practices and valuable lessons are spread throughout the organization.
Yeah, it's about tapping into that informal learning, the power of peer-to-peer exchange.
Absolutely. And the fifth and final driver is exposure as a learning method. This goes beyond traditional classroom training. It's about providing a variety of experiences that broaden perspectives and develop leadership skills in the real world. Things like cross-functional projects, networking opportunities, coaching, mentoring, even seeking out and using client feedback for development.
So it's a more holistic approach, recognizing that learning happens in all sorts of ways through different interactions and experiences.
Right. And these 5 drivers, they really paint a picture of a more connected, collaborative, and experience-driven approach to cultivating leaders.
Definitely. So we've got the 5 drivers.
Yeah.
Now, how does this all fit together in practice? How can organizations actually assess where they stand and what they need to do to improve?
Well, that's where the report's leadership maturity model comes in. It outlines 4 distinct levels of maturity that organizations typically progress through. And it shows how those 5 drivers we just talked about, along with those 3 overarching factors, culture, design leadership, and organizational design, actually play out at each level.
Okay, I'm really interested to hear about these levels. Let's walk through them. Where do we start?
The first level is foundational. And at this level, leadership development is often seen as mainly an HR responsibility. They send people to training programs, but that's about it.
Yeah, kind of a check-the-box approach.
Right. There's usually not a clear leadership model, or it's not well communicated. Risk-taking is pretty low, knowledge sharing is limited, and collaboration between HR and business leaders on this stuff is minimal.
So it's pretty reactive and siloed. What kind of impact does that have on an organization?
Well, apart from just being low maturity, it can lead to higher turnover, a lack of innovation, and real difficulty adapting to change. Those are some of the real-world consequences.
Got it. So how does an organization move up from there? What does it take to reach that next level?
The next level is integrated. And here, organizations start to realize that experience is important, not just formal training.
Okay, they're starting to get it.
They are. You might see some informal mentoring, some on-the-job development opportunities. Maybe there's a leadership model documented somewhere, but it's not really widely understood or consistently used.
So some progress, but still a long way to go.
Yeah. Risk aversion is still common, knowledge sharing is still limited, and collaboration between HR and business leaders is happening, but it's not strategic or consistent.
Okay. What about the next level up?
That's the scalable level. And here, organizations are getting more intentional about incorporating real-world exposure into leadership development. Things like stretch assignments, cross-functional projects. They're starting to see the value of taking calculated risks to drive innovation. Knowledge sharing becomes more recognized and encouraged. There's more effort to communicate the leadership model. And HR and business leaders start working together more strategically, aligning development initiatives with business goals.
They're really building some momentum here. Leadership development is becoming more integrated into how the business operates.
Exactly. And then we get to the top level, systemic leadership. This is where leadership development is truly woven into the fabric of the organization. They leverage education, experience, exposure, and the environment itself to create a culture of continuous learning and leadership growth.
Wow, so it's not just about programs and initiatives, it's about the whole system working together.
Precisely. Risk-taking is encouraged and rewarded. Knowledge is seen as a critical asset and is shared freely. The leadership model is not just communicated, it's deeply ingrained in the culture and guides decision-making. HR and business leaders are true partners in everything related to leader development.
It's a really proactive and sophisticated approach.
It is, and the impact is pretty significant.
I bet. So what does the research say about the results that organizations at this top level actually achieve?
Well, the data is really compelling. Organizations at the systemic leadership level, they have significantly better financial performance, they achieve their business goals more effectively, and get this, they are up to 11 times more likely to be building the talent they need for a competitive advantage compared to those at the lower levels.
11 times. That's huge. It really underscores that this isn't just some fluffy HR thing. It's directly connected to business success.
Absolutely. And the report goes into detail about how this progression through the maturity levels affects those three overarching factors we talked about earlier: organizational culture, design leadership, and organizational design. It shows how things like the strength of the culture, the investment in development, and how flexible the organization is all evolve as leadership development matures.
So it's not just about achieving a certain level. It's about the journey of continuous improvement. Can you give us an example of how a specific aspect might change as an organization moves through these levels?
Sure, let's take internal communication about leadership as an example. At the foundational level, it's often ad hoc, limited to maybe announcing training programs. As organizations move to integrated, it gets a little more structured, maybe communicating some new initiatives. Then, at scalable, it becomes more consistent, reinforcing the leadership model and development opportunities. And finally, at systemic leadership, communication about leadership is everywhere. It's part of the organization's DNA, woven into the overall narrative, constantly promoting learning and growth.
It really highlights how those principles become deeply embedded as organizations mature. So after all this, what's the big takeaway? Is it about finding that one best leadership style and just copying it?
Not at all. What the research really tells us is that high-impact leadership isn't about chasing some trendy leadership style. It's about building that supportive and dynamic ecosystem, a strong culture, well-designed practices, and an adaptable organizational structure, all working together to foster continuous learning, collaboration, and a shared sense of purpose.
It's about creating fertile ground where leadership can flourish naturally, regardless of individual styles.
Exactly. And that's a powerful message.
It is. So, as we wrap up, let's bring it back to you, our listener. Think about your own organization for a moment. Based on what we've discussed today, where do you think it falls on that leadership maturity model? Is it foundational, integrated, scalable, or striving for that systemic level?
And even more importantly, think about those 5 critical drivers we talked about: communicating the leadership model, HR and business collaboration, risk-taking, knowledge sharing, and exposure as a learning method.
What's one specific concrete action you can take, even a small one, related to any of these drivers or those 3 overarching factors, to nudge your organization in the right direction, to move it towards greater leadership maturity and ultimately better performance?
It doesn't have to be some massive overhaul. Sometimes even small changes in how you communicate, collaborate, or encourage learning can make a big difference over time.
And remember, we've only scratched the surface here. The full Bersin by Deloitte High-Impact Leadership Report has a wealth of information, specific recommendations, practical steps that organizations at each maturity level can take.
We highly encourage you to check it out. It's a fantastic resource for anyone who's serious about going beyond just talking about leadership and actually building a culture where effective leaders can grow and thrive.
Because ultimately, that's how we create a better future, not just for our organizations, but for everyone. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to ProcessCast. This episode was brought to you by HEFLO, the BPM platform that empowers businesses to document, automate, and optimize their processes with AI. Experience the intelligence to simplify complex business processes and accelerate your growth with our complete management solution. Visit heflo.com to learn more. Be sure to follow ProcessCast for more insights on business process management, and don't forget to share this episode with your network. Until next time.